Hi guys, welcome back to another video, and today we're gonna talk about the top 5 care mistakes that we've all committed while growing orchids, even if you were completely new to this hobby or if you have bloomed a few orchids here and there. I'm sure you have experienced some of those. If you haven't, I'm sure you will probably encountered some of these in your way. For this reason, I decided to record this video, so maybe it can help you to avoid some of those. I hope this video is helpful, and as you can see, the windows are open, so the video might be a bit noisier, but that's because it's finally warm around here. So we had a lovely, bright and sunny week. Without further ado, let's start talking about some of these mistakes. Mistake number 1 is maybe, I would say, overwatering more than the watering. What happens is, with these beauties here, we need to observe them and get to know how they work. So we need to water most of the most common orchids when they approach dryness or when the roots are completely dry. It's not that you will completely forget about them and pretend they don't need any water. That's not it. What it means is that we need to observe the roots. Like this one, can you see how white it is? It's because it's dry. So when they were talking about roots inside the potting mix, it's the same thing. So the key here is to observe your plant after you offer some water. Some orchids might need to be soaked for 15 minutes if they are potted only in bark. Others, if they have sphagnum moss, for example, maybe you just add a little bit of water and then you notice the temperature where you live, how the temperature is, and if it's very warm, it's very cold, it's very humid, if it is quite dry. So all of these will affect how the plant will actually lose water to the environment. So we need to keep an eye on the root system, like this one. Let me grab it. This is a very clear example that this plant is very much dry. As you can see here, the roots are all whitish inside this potting mix. It's because they need to be watered. With the most common orchids like Phalaenopsis as well, is the same thing. When you notice that the roots, they are dry, they will be like grayish in color. So when you notice something like that, the key is to add some water and wait for the roots to actually absorb this water. However, if we add so much water to our potting mix, what happens is that we will have a very, very wet environment, which will result in having a serious case of root rot. And in the end, root rot causes the roots to die. Then without roots, our plants will become dehydrated, and over time we can actually lose our orchids. So orchids, usually they need the right balance between air and humidity, and you need to keep an eye on them. So if you need to just soak and remove the water and throw away, do it. If you need to just add some water and wait for it to dry out between watering, do it. But remember that they shouldn't be sitting in a whole pool of water waiting for the water to dry out, because you can cause some root rot and we don't want our roots to die. So that's the first mistake. Let's go and let's talk about the second mistake. Oh yeah, sorry, completely forgot. So for you to fix that, not only observe your pot, but also very important to have drainage in your potting mix. It helps with watering, so having holes in the pot, the water will evaporate easier. Something else is that you can definitely water your plant whatever you want to or whatever you can do it, but it's easier for the water to evaporate faster when we water in the morning. And also, if there is water trapped at night time, can have some rot. So if you don't feel very confident, maybe you should consider watering your plants when the day is starting. But that's more for beginners. If you have enough experience, you can definitely water at any time, but you need to be careful not to leave water. Actually, don't leave stagnant water at the bottom of your pot for a very long time, because then you can actually lose the roots. That's it. Let's go to the mistake number 2. Mistake number 2 is, it's pretty obvious, but it's not that obvious if you are a beginner or if you don't have much experience with orchids. It is using proper mix. So I know people, like I know a ton of people that come to me to ask tips about orchids, and their plants are potted in soil. So the most common hybrids that we see out there, I'm talking here about Phalaenopsis, Dendrobiums, Caplayas, Vandas, Oncidians. We have to pot them up in orchid potting mix. Usually it will be a mix of bark and maybe bark with perlite or bark with moss. Anyway, the important thing is for you to look for orchid mix. There are some orchids that are terrestrial. I'm not covering them here. I'm talking about the most common orchids. They need to be potted up in orchid mix. Why? Because soil is too heavy for these roots. They are adapted to grow in the air and absorb humidity from the air. So when we pot these orchids in soil, what happens is that the soil can suffocate these roots. And when we have a suffocated root, the root will probably die, and then we will probably lose the roots of our orchids, and over time, the health of our orchid will decline, and then we can end up losing our orchid. For this reason, the potting mix that we decided to use for our orchid is very, very important. Keep that in mind. Let's go to the mistake number 3. Mistake number 3 is, let me grab someone else here, improper lighting. So orchids, they have specific light requirement. They need light as all of our other plants in the world to be able to photosynthesize and keep growing, pushing out flowers, pushing out new roots. So they need light. But there is some difference among the type of orchids that we buy. So first of all, Phalaenopsis, this one here, we have to be careful to not offer too much bright light, let's say midday sunlight in eastern southern windows that can actually burn the leaves of our orchid. But equally, don't place these plants in a super dark room where they will not receive enough amount of light for them to keep growing and actually having a healthy metabolism. Signs that your orchid is receiving too much light: when you notice that the leaves of our orchids are too light, yellowishy, then you can have some brown spots as well, like large spots at the leaves. Maybe the sun is burning some of these leaves, which is not a good sign. And some other sign is that your orchid actually is not receiving enough sunlight. It's that you notice that the leaves will become dark green, super dark green, but on top of that, over time, they will not be able to push out flower spikes, and you notice as well they are not going to be growing as fast as they were supposed to grow. So how can you fix that? As I was mentioning, with Phalaenopsis orchids, such as this one, you can just place them around where you have some filtered sunlight. They will do super fine. But there are other orchids, such as Cattleyas and Vandas, that they need more like sort of a bright light. So for these plants where I live here, I can leave them exposed to the brightest windows. They do fine. They will produce some anthocyanin. The leaves will become like purplish because they're exposed to bright sunlight, but they do super well in there. If you notice that the leaves, as I mentioned here, are becoming too yellow, or you notice that they are being burnt, you need to move your plant and move the location. Equally, if you notice that your plant's not blooming, the plant's not growing as well as it should, the leaves are too dark, again, change the position of your orchid. It depends where you are on the globe. There are different type of light exposure, so you need to discover if it's better a southern or maybe northern type of window. And if you don't have enough light during the day, then maybe you can use some growing lights as well. So that is the third mistake. Let's go to the fourth mistake. Fourth mistake is related to a couple of things that I mentioned already, but is simply ignoring the roots of your orchid. What happens when you ignore the roots of your orchid? You don't look into the potting mix from time to time. You just pretend that they are there, blooming and growing. Is that you might not notice when the roots are too dry and they need water, or when they are too wet and they need water, or maybe if you have a massive case of root rot, you don't have roots growing inside the potting mix, and then your plant is probably very unhealthy. So for this reason, these plants, they need to be cared properly, and which means that from time to time it's advisable to check the potting mix, stick your fingers inside the mix, check if it's wet, is approaching dryness, check if the roots are very dry or very like whitish, which means they need some water. Another thing is check if they are growing inside your potting mix. If you notice that they are not growing, that means that you probably should change the potting mix. So for me, the key here is to observe your plant. It's very important to have some general knowledge about orchids, so you don't pot them in soil as I mentioned, and also don't leave them to die exposed to sunlight. But more than that is spending some time with a plant. It doesn't need to be like every day all the time, no. But once a week or maybe once each 2 weeks, check the potting mix. So you make sure that the roots are growing, because the roots are very, very important to keep our plant healthy and growing naturally. So now let's go to the next mistake. Mistake number 5, not repotting when it's needed. So what happens is most of the orchids that we find locally, they will come potted in organic material, organic mix. So our plants, they would definitely need to be repotted when we buy them from nurseries, supermarkets. It's really, really important to check which orchid you have, find the right mix and repot it. But if you have it in your collection for a while, and then you are like me, have to work, have family, have a ton of other plants, sometimes we just forget about them. And there are some signs that you can look for and notice that your plant needs to be repotted. So I have in here a very good example. Oh, this one. Haha. What happening here? My plant, first of all, is overflowing, is actually growing out of the pot. Not only that, but if I remove the outer pot, I hope you can see, but my plant is full of roots growing all around this pot. It's too big for here, and the repotting is long overdue. So this is a case of a plant that I need to repot. It's been there for more than 2 years, so the mix is probably broken down. I can see that plant is growing outside of the pot. There are other signs, for example, if you have lots of pests and maybe some pests growing inside the potting mix, it's a good time for you to remove everything, spray hydrogen peroxide, get rid of the pest, repot your plant. If you notice that you have a foul smell inside the pot, again, it's a good time for you to repot your plant. So now let's go to the next mistake. The next mistake is about fertilizing. So plants need food, and fertilizer will offer this food to our orchids. Although they are not a heavy feeder as some houseplants, it's not exactly advisable that you use houseplant feeders to feed your plant. You need to do your research, but these plants, they will need some fertilizer. Specifically if you live in a place where your water is very soft, or if you actually water with rainwater. I'm not going to cover all of these, but some of these waters, they won't have minerals and things that your plant needs to grow. For this reason, these plants will need some fertilizer. There are a few options out there. So how you fix that? If you notice, for example, with cattleya, sometimes they will have black tips. That means they don't have enough nitrogen. There are other signs your plant will not bloom as well as they potentially could do. They are not grow as tall as they potentially could, just because they don't have enough nutrients inside their potting mix. So you need to buy maybe orchid fertilizer and read the amount that they suggest in there and add to the potting mix. Something else, there are some slow release fertilizers out there as well that you can add to the pot while you're repotting your plant, that will help them to actually have this balanced nutrition, as we say. So usually we say that the best fertilizer are the ones with 20-20-20, is with the, I think it's phosphorus, nitrogen, and potassium. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Then you have to check, but with orchids, they have to be diluted. So depends on the water where you are as well. That's something that I have heavy water here, but I do water my plants with tap water. But you need to do your research, but they need fertilizer. So keep that in mind while you are growing your orchid. Otherwise, you might not have amazing plants around you because they are lacking nutrients. Now let's go to the next mistake. The next mistake here, I think, is the lightest one compared to all of the other ones, but affects some of the common issues that we have with orchids. It's related to airflow and humidity. I'm gonna tell you here that I don't use humidity trays and nothing related to it. They will do well inside your home. They are super adapted to our home conditions, which is great. However, we have to remember that lots of these orchids that we see around, even if they are hybrids, their parents come from tropical forests. And inside the tropical forests, we have a lot of wind, so a lot of air circulation. We also have humidity, a ton of humidity. The key is for you to fix and not having issues with that is to water when your plant needs to be watered, not overwatering as I mentioned before, but also even if you live in a flat, I know that sometimes can get very cold where I live, so my environment will be kind of closed, but as soon as the weather improves a bit, I open my windows, I need this air circulating, I know that it will help my plants. But that's not all. What we can do as well is to buy pots that have ventilation holes. Not only that, you can definitely pierce some of the pots, the plastic pots, and then you can have pots with better ventilation. That's one thing that will help. And when we have a nice ventilation, nice airflow, we have less chance to have rots. So, for example, one common issue with Phalaenopsis that we have, and with some other orchids as well, is because we have water trapped among the leaves of our plant. What happens is that we're going to have crown rot, stem rot, and even if you have a cattleya and we have a new growth coming through, poking through, and then we have water trapped in there, what happens is that we can have an issue with rot. If you don't have enough ventilation, we can have bacterial infections and fungal infection that will actually damage our plants. So if you live in a place that it's warm enough, keep the windows open, help to ventilate, and will definitely help our plants. It's really, really important. Otherwise, go with some ventilation slits, around your pot, specifically if you live in a place that it's cold and humid. So I'm sure these plants will love, because that's what was offered in their natural habitat. Humidity, I usually fix with watering. The right amount of water will do the trick, specifically with these most adapted plants that we have around me. I found most of them locally, so they are not super rare, or they are mostly adapted to home environments. So that concludes my list of mistakes. Let me know if you have experienced any of the mistakes that I listed above. If there was anything here that I missed that I should mention maybe in the future, I'd love to know and to have your feedback. If you enjoy this type of content, please hit the like button, leave a comment down below, and I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.